Hey guys, tonight we begin with a single nail, and the exact moment British diplomacy decided to take its pants off. The year is 1767. Your boots haven't been dry in weeks, and you've just stumbled onto the shores of Tahiti. There's sunlight, music, and generosity so baffling that the average sailor doesn't know whether to feel grateful or guilty. Spoiler, they pick neither. This is the story of what happens when two civilizations meet and one of them immediately tries to pay for sex with hardware. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You've been at sea so long your bones feel pickled. Salt has replaced most of your personality. The sun has erased the last traces of what your mother once described as rosy complexion. Now you're several degrees past pink, somewhere between boiled ham and cannon-blasted parchment. You stand on the deck of the HMS Dolphin, clinging to the railing like it's the last honest thing left in the universe. And then, just ahead, land. Not jagged, not gray, not the kind of land that tries to bite you with cliffs and hostile wind. No, this land invites you. Tahiti appears like a lie someone told to sailors to keep them alive. Lush, green, spilling over black volcanic ridges, palm trees swaying in slow-motion choreography. The air already sweeter and less judgmental than anything you've breathed in months. Around you, the crew stirs like a hive of slightly concussed bees. Men who haven't smiled since Plymouth are now grinning like boys at a sweet shop window. The cook weeps quietly. No one mocks him. Everyone understands. The last fresh thing you ate had questions about its own species. You haven't seen a woman in 6 months. The deck smells like mildew, pipe smoke, and people giving up. The sails are slack with anticipation. Orders are barked, but nobody's really listening anymore. Your captain tries to maintain dignity, but he's blinking too fast. There's a tremble in the voice of every man pretending this is just another island. It isn't. You feel that. Even the ship seems to lean forward, creaking softly, like it, too, wants off this cursed ocean. As you approach, canoes begin to appear. Dozens of them, slim, elegant, carved with more care than your last family heirloom. They move across the water like thoughts. No sails, no thunder, just rhythm and grace. The Tahitians in them are sun-burnished, poised, and absolutely not surprised to see you. They paddle closer, standing tall in their boats, with the ease of people who have never fallen over, trying to put on trousers in a storm. You suddenly become aware that you're covered in rips, bruises, and some sort of mold that seems to have unionized along your collarbone. You try to wipe yourself clean. It makes it worse. One of the islanders smiles and waves. You panic and salute. The ship is anchored, but it feels more like it's been caught. Tahiti surrounds you with smells that don't come from salted meat or wet ropes. Things bloom here. Flowers, mostly. Possibly joy. Maybe consequences. You don't care. Your boots hit the sand with the energy of someone who would marry a tree if it offered shade. The heat isn't like the oppressive glare that burned you all the way from Tierra del Fuego. This heat feels considerate, like it wants to warm your joints, not destroy your will to exist. The crew disembarks in uneven rows. There is no formation. This is not conquest. This is stumbling toward salvation with bandaged ankles and high hopes. The Tahitians greet you, not with spears, but laughter, soft voices, melodic greetings in a language you don't know but immediately trust. Children dash barefoot across the sand. Women smile with open curiosity. Men gesture toward food, toward water, toward the shade under wide-leafed trees. You half expect them to vanish when you blink. They don't. They feed you. They hand you fruit that tastes like the idea of dessert. Bananas so rich, you wonder if you've been lied to your entire life. Coconut water poured straight from the shell into your salt-blistered hands. It's too much. The kindness is overwhelming. You were prepared for danger, for suspicion, maybe even for a spear through the leg. You weren't prepared for welcome. One of the younger sailors whispers that this must be heaven. He's quickly corrected. Heaven, he's reminded, does not include this many visible thighs. The captain tries to maintain ceremony. He asks for a translator. There is none. He begins gesturing wildly with his hat and a compass, sweating through his uniform as a Tahitian elder offers him a mango and some kind of herbal wrap that smells like relief. You are now watching your superior officer get out negotiated by someone wearing a necklace of shells and not much else. You begin to realize something else. You are not in control of this exchange. You came here thinking you were the explorer, the discoverer, the civilizer. But you're not even in charge of your own shoes anymore. The island knows this. The people know this. And deep down, you know it too. You are the guest. You just haven't figured out what you'll be paying for dinner with. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Not your smell, though that's certainly trying its best to be noticed. No, it's their air thick with crushed blossoms, roasted fruit, and something clean and green that makes your nose twitch with suspicion. You're not used to the air being this cooperative. Back home, it smells like coal smoke and obligation. On the ship, it smells like a wet boot eating its own feelings. But here, the breeze smells like it was filtered through poetry, and unfortunately, you've brought a scent of your own. The crew disembarks in waves, every man attempting dignity while sweating through months of poor decisions. There's no hiding it. You all reek. The kind of stench that clings to your soul. It's a musk forged in the crucible of salted beef, damp wool, and absolutely zero self-respect. You could bottle it, sell it to an enemy, and win a war without firing a shot. The Tahitians smile anyway. They don't flinch, don't recoil, don't even blink at the human barnyard you've brought to their shores. The women greet you with calm curiosity. The men glance at your boots like they've never seen someone voluntarily dress for ankle imprisonment. No one comments. That, more than anything, tells you how far you are from home. You adjust your collar, which is less about modesty and more about hiding a neckline that has developed its own ecosystem. The air wraps around you like warm linen, and your body begins to betray you by relaxing. Muscles unclench. The ache behind your eyes lifts slightly. It feels like the island is trying to uncoil the British right out of you. Food appears without request. Platters of roasted yam, grilled fish, and breadfruit that smells like a pie dreaming of freedom. You take a bite and forget how to chew. Your tongue, raised in a strict Protestant household, doesn't know what to do with sweetness that isn't followed by punishment. A woman places a garland of flowers around your neck. You mutter something unintelligible in response. She laughs gently, not mockery, delight, like watching a child try to dance for the first time. Around you, the crew devolves into toddlers with facial hair, giddy, awkward, staring too long at everything. Men who would kill over a biscuit now sit cross-legged beside strangers, speaking in elaborate hand gestures and pointing enthusiastically at bananas. Your captain makes a noble attempt to keep things formal. He demands order, establishes curfews, instructs everyone to mind their conduct, and then, seconds later, steps into a carved wooden bath offered by a woman who looks like a minor goddess and probably smells like the concept of vacation. His boots are still on the beach. The Tahitians observe you with what can only be called patience. You assume they must think you're impressive. Advanced, representatives of the most powerful empire in the world. But when one of them politely holds his nose near a sailor who hasn't washed since Gibraltar, You begin to suspect your reputation isn't doing the heavy lifting anymore. Still, they welcome you. You don't know if it's custom, hospitality, or just a fascination with whatever madness led you across the world. Dressed like chimney sweeps on punishment detail. But they bring you gifts, fruit, carved tools, even woven mats so you don't have to sit in the sand like idiots. One man offers you a bundle of herbs that smells like clarity and sleep. Another gestures for your name, then says it back to you like it's a small bird. For a moment, you forget you're supposed to be discovering them. The crew loosens by the hour. Men who spent months snarling over biscuits are now humming songs they don't remember learning. Someone invents a dance that involves both hands and very little rhythm. Another tries to give a stirring speech but gets distracted halfway through by a roasted pineapple and never finishes. You tell yourself this is diplomacy, cultural exchange, bridging the gap between worlds. But deep down, a quieter truth is humming. You're not the center of anything here. You're the guest, the strange, smelly guest who brought thunder and iron and forgot to pack humility. And for the first time since you left home, that doesn't feel like failure. It feels like relief. The sea is flat as glass when they arrive. No fanfare, no war drums, no ominous chanting to warn you that you're about to lose every assumption you've ever held. Just silence and the soft chop of wooden paddles dipping into water like polite applause. The canoes emerge from the morning mist in small groups, spread out like dancers in a ritual you were never invited to. You, of course, assume this means they're in awe. You assume many things. There are dozens of them, sleek, symmetrical, painted in ochres and blacks, carved with lines that mean something if you weren't so busy assuming they don't. Each canoe holds 3 or 4 figures, upright and poised, moving with the kind of effortless balance you usually associate with cats or con artists. The men wear minimal cloth and maximal confidence. The women sit like royalty born to drift. They do not yell. They do not wave. They simply arrive. You, being British, react the only way you know how. You stare like you've just spotted land on the moon and assume you're the first to do it. You whisper "savages" to someone beside you. He nods, though you're both secretly wondering how they made it out here with no compass, no sextant, and no British smugness. The truth is unsettling. You came here to discover something, but the way they look at you from their boats, with quiet, unamused curiosity, it's very clear who's discovering whom. One canoe pulls up alongside the Dolphin, the paddler, lean and carved like a statue that forgot to be still, tilts his head at your ship the way someone might peer at a large, noisy animal that smells faintly of mildew and guilt. His eyes scan the masts, the rigging, the sad attempts at laundry hanging from ropes, and finally settle on you, standing proud in your sun-bleached coat, arms behind your back like you're auditioning for command over nature itself. He smiles. Not the smile of awe. The smile of someone clocking exactly how many nails it would take to dismantle your upper deck. You lower a rope ladder and 3 of them climb aboard like they've done it before. You brace for reverence, or at the very least, mild fear. What you get is a woman who walks past your captain, runs her fingers along the wooden railing, and then lightly taps one of the iron nails holding it in place. She looks at you, points, then lifts a brow as if to say, "How many for that one?" You blink, unprepared for barter this early in the encounter. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you'd envisioned the locals throwing flowers or possibly themselves at the feet of civilization. But these people are unimpressed. Their gaze slides past your buttons and hats and settles on what really matters. Your tools, your iron, your metal bits, and shiny things. You're not bringers of light. You're bringers of hardware. It stings a little. Someone offers them beads. They smile politely and hand them back. A sailor tries a mirror. It earns a chuckle. But the moment you hand over a single nail, the energy shifts. Eyes widen. Heads tilt. The man beside you mutters, "They like iron." You don't say anything, but you're already calculating how many spare fastenings the ship can survive without before it stops being afloat and starts being conceptually boat-shaped. Another canoe pulls up, then another. Your deck begins to fill with locals laughing, gesturing, trading words you don't understand but somehow feel. They move with the comfort of people used to being on the ocean, which is unsettling for a crew that still gets seasick in the galley. They touch everything not with greed, but with interest, like museum curators assessing whether your empire is worth the price of admission. Your captain attempts diplomacy. He tries Latin, then French, then something that might be English if you squint hard and ignore the panic. None of it lands, but a Tahitian man steps forward and begins speaking slowly, clearly, pausing, as if hoping one of you will evolve mid-sentence. You don't. So he sighs and gestures again to the nail in his hand. Trade begins in earnest. Shirt buttons disappear. Belt buckles vanish. Knives are gone before you can say, family heirloom. And always, the nails. You can feel the deck loosening under your boots, but no one stops. It's not theft. It's enthusiasm. A mutual agreement that your ship is less important than what it's made of. The sun climbs higher. The smell of fruit drifts over from one of the canoes, and someone passes up roasted breadfruit wrapped in leaves. A sailor accepts it and nearly proposes on the spot. You watch it all, this exchange of cultures, this handshake of worlds, and you feel strangely small. They came with nothing but canoes and confidence. You came with cannons and expectations, but it's their island, their rules, and their terms. And you're just another story they'll tell later, about the floating house that came from the horizon and fell apart, for love, curiosity, or maybe just for nails. You've barely finished handing over the third nail when someone takes off their clothes. It's not dramatic. No fanfare, no sultry glance. One moment she's standing there, palm outstretched for whatever trinket you're about to part with, and the next, she's slipping the woven cloth from her waist like it's just another kind of weather. The crew freezes mid-trade. Someone drops a tin cup. Another forgets how to blink. The captain goes very still, suddenly invested in a nearby tree. She's not the only one. Within minutes, a ripple moves through the Tahitian crowd, a collective shedding of fabric so casual it feels like you've wandered into someone else's dream. Laughter rings out. A boy leaps from a canoe and cannonballs into the water. A woman passes a garland to a sailor and adjusts nothing at all. The message is not flirtation, it's comfort, ease, a complete lack of shame wrapped in sunlight and sea spray. You, on the other hand, are constructed entirely of shame. You've brought enough for everyone. Layers of wool, linen, leather, and emotional repression cling to your body like punishment. You sweat inside your vest. You sweat inside your soul. You shift your feet and pretend to be studying the coastline, which is difficult when the coastline keeps handing you mangoes with one breast and a winning smile. No one speaks the same language, but somehow that makes things easier. No need for grammar or diplomacy. You gesture. They gesture back. You say something about trade routes. They offer you a carved shell and a hand on your arm. The exchange is rapid, unfiltered, and completely devoid of the usual British need for paperwork. You hand over a belt buckle. Someone laughs and draws a quick symbol in the sand. You nod as if you understand, which you absolutely don't. It's chaos, but it's efficient chaos. Your captain tries to rein it in. He calls for order, demands everyone stay on mission. But the mission, whatever it was, has clearly evolved. You came to observe. You are being observed. You came to teach. You are being instructed in a language made entirely of eyebrows, laughter, and lightly suggestive fruit offerings. A sailor nearby is deep in negotiations using only a spoon, a freckled shoulder, and a well-timed hiccup. Someone else is bartering a boot for a kiss. That might be a greeting, or might be the start of a lifelong identity crisis. Another crewman sits wide-eyed, a flower tucked behind each ear, nodding solemnly as a group of women explain something using hand signs and occasional pokes to his chest. You try to remember protocol, something about cultural sensitivity perhaps, mutual respect. You open your mouth to say something authoritative, but it gets lost in the sound of splashing and a sudden burst of singing from a canoe. Someone touches your sleeve. A woman, eyes bright, smile like she already knows the end of the story. She says something in a language that sounds like wind through palm leaves, tilts her head, and points at your jacket. Then she points at herself, then back at your jacket. You laugh nervously. She waits. You glance around. The crew has descended into a kind of peaceful delirium. Shirts are optional. Shoes are negotiable. A man is learning to hula with the stiff grace of a man who once got injured by a coat rack. Another is trying to explain what a monarchy is to a small child holding a coconut. You realize that you are the only person still buttoned all the way to the throat. So you do the unthinkable. You take off your hat. She beams, takes it gently, places it on her own head like a crown, and hands you a necklace of shells that smells faintly of honey and the opposite of England. No one seems alarmed. No one is keeping score. The Tahitians move with ease among you, unfazed by your stammering, your awkward limbs, your inability to say anything useful. They know this game. They've played it before. You are not the first to wash up here thinking yourself the center of the story. The sun moves westward. The crew spreads across the beach in small clusters, talking without talking, discovering that sometimes the most fluent thing you can say is nothing at all. And as the stars begin to blink into the sky, you lie back in the sand, fully clothed, partially understood, and more welcomed than you have any right to be. You come prepared. At least, you think you do. A small chest is unlocked and reverently carried down to the beach. The wood creaking like it knows the weight of empire is tucked inside. Inside the chest, treasure. Strings of glass beads in every color you could imagine. Buttons carved from bone and shell. Little mirrors, tiny scissors. A few handfuls of brass tacks. Trinkets designed to dazzle. You've read the reports, the journals, the logs. Indigenous peoples love beads. Beads are currency, status, wonder. This is what they trade for. This is how you show them the shining brilliance of progress, one colorful bauble at a time. So you open the box with the posture of a magician mid-reveal. The Tahitians gather around. They peer in. They murmur to each other. One man lifts a string of beads and rolls them between his fingers. Another picks up a button, sniffs it, and then calmly sets it down like it has mildly disappointed him. A woman turns a mirror toward the sun, squints, shrugs, and tosses it lightly back onto the pile. You smile, because this is the part where they're supposed to gasp, or trade coconuts for an armband, or offer you a carved idol in exchange for 3 blue beads and a button shaped like a duck. But no one does. They're too busy looking at something else. It starts with one of the younger sailors. He's traded a single iron nail for a small carved comb. You barely notice. Then another swaps a hinge for a woven bracelet. Someone hands off a spoon and gets a kiss on the cheek and a handful of roasted yam. You blink. Look down at your glittering pile of civilizational brilliance. Look up at the quiet frenzy beginning to unfold around the ship's carpentry. They want the nails. Not the shiny things you brought. Not the beads. Not the buttons. The mirrors. The little bells meant to delight. No. What captures their attention, what draws eyes and points, and murmured, approval is cold, unromantic iron, nails, spikes, hooks, hinges, fasteners of any kind. Things you didn't even consider gifts because they weren't symbolic. They were just useful. And you are now watching your crew remove them from the ship with the careful dedication of men robbing their own future. At first, it's a few extras. Spare nails from toolkits, bent ones straightened against rocks. But soon it spreads. Men are prying nails out of crates, pulling fixtures off doors. One particularly enterprising sailor swaps the hinge of a supply hatch for a handful of bananas and what may or may not be a date later. You can't tell. The beads remain, untouched and glinting in the sun like a bad punchline. You try to reassert value. You lift a string of vibrant green beads and hold them out like a peace offering to a woman nearby. She smiles, tilts her head, and points instead at the iron buckle of your boot. You hesitate. She nods. The message is clear. The beads are pretty. The buckle is something you can use. You hadn't thought about it like that. In your mind, the trade was symbolic. Gesture for gesture, beauty for beauty. But here, the equation is simpler. A nail holds a canoe together. A hinge lets a door swing. A hook suspends food above ants. There's no romance to it, no flattery, just purpose. You didn't come prepared to trade purpose. You came to trade sparkle. And sparkle, it turns out, is in low demand. By the third day, the ship has begun to creak in unfamiliar ways. The lower deck feels softer. A railing wobbles when you lean on it. The carpenter is pale and sweating, whispering about load-bearing joints. The bosun files an official complaint while casually palming a handful of small screws that are probably no longer inventory. But the men are happy. They've never traded so well. A single rusted nail buys a bowl of stew. A few more buys something that makes them walk differently the next morning. The officers are panicking, of course, but in a quiet, diplomatic way. The kind of panic you log in your journal as unforeseen materials exchange. You keep returning to the chest of beads, lifting the strings, the buttons, the carved things you once thought were irresistible. You wonder how many reports and field notes and travel logs were written by men who assumed that because the locals accepted the gifts, they were impressed by them. But here, no one's pretending. They don't want decoration. They want infrastructure, and you're running out of nails. It begins subtly, like most disasters do. A few canoes pull alongside the ship one morning, and out of them climb women. Not many at first. Just enough to draw attention, just enough to stop a few conversations mid-sentence. They move with quiet confidence, stepping onto the deck like it belongs to them. And the crew, who have spent months arguing about everything from sail tension to whose turn it is to swab the latrines, fall into a hush so immediate it might as well be reverence. These women are not meek or mysterious. They don't flutter their eyes or gasp at your boots. They laugh easily, speak boldly, and walk through the crowd like they're sorting through a market stall, casually deciding who looks most interesting. One of them leans against a cannon and begins asking questions in a voice that sounds like sun-warmed honey. No one understands the words, but it doesn't matter. You've never seen grown men so eager to be interrogated. The effect is instantaneous. The men transform. Rough hands smooth out their shirts, straighten collars, slap each other on the back like they're auditioning for some kind of invisible promotion. One sailor pulls a comb from nowhere and begins grooming himself with the concentration of a man trying to reset his entire identity. Another abandons his mop mid-swab and mutters something about love at first sight. The mop never gets picked up again. You try to maintain perspective. This is normal, you tell yourself. Cultural exchange, curiosity, mutual respect. But then someone removes a brass hinge from the captain's quarters and hands it over with a smile so wide it makes you nervous. The women accept every offering with the polite amusement of queens watching jesters perform. They wear flowers tucked behind their ears, wrap themselves in bright cloths that manage to reveal more than they conceal, and seem to understand exactly how much power they're holding without needing to explain it. Another hinge disappears, then a bolt. Then someone trades the galley door handle for what appears to be an impromptu dance lesson. You watch it happen in real time. The complete structural dismantling of Her Majesty's vessel in exchange for attention, affection, and the possibility of something more. Not even promises, just possibilities. The crew works like men possessed. Not by lust exactly, but by the sheer, delirious need to impress. It's courtship by disassembly. A midshipman climbs up to the crow's nest and returns with a handful of decorative rivets, which he offers like they're diamonds. A carpenter nearly breaks into tears as two seasoned deckhands casually pull iron nails out of the quarterdeck to trade for kisses and carved pendants. The carpenter tries to stop them, but one of the women puts a flower behind his ear and he sits down for the rest of the afternoon. You think about your mother. Not directly, just vaguely. A memory in the back of your mind of someone saying, "Dignity is a man's armor." But it's hard to dug. Remember lessons about virtue. When your crew is lining up like volunteers at a kissing booth, each man cradling a handful of hardware and hope. The captain finally steps in, tries to re-establish command. He delivers a speech about order and naval pride. No more trading structural pieces of the ship for flirtation. No more nails, no more hinges, no more door frames. He's halfway through his list of prohibited transactions when a woman leans forward and touches his sleeve. He goes quiet. The crew does not applaud. They simply resume negotiations. You tell yourself you won't participate, that you'll remain objective, steady, detached. You're here to observe, not to be seduced by sun, scent, and smiles that tilt ever so slightly when they catch you watching. But then someone offers you a small hand-carved necklace in exchange for the clasp of your belt, and you find your hands moving before your thoughts catch up. It's not just desire. It's something deeper, stranger, a feeling you've never been offered in England. Not reverence, not even romance, just presence. As if for once, you're not an officer, or a sailor, or a tool of empire. You're simply a man, standing in the sun, being looked at like you might actually be worth knowing. By evening, the ship sounds different. It groans in odd places. Wind whistles through gaps that weren't there before. But the crew sleeps with smiles on their faces and flowers in their hair, curled around memories they haven't even finished making. And somewhere below deck, the carpenter weeps softly into a blueprint. You tell yourself it's just a few spares, extras, bits that won't be missed. A handful of nails from a storage crate, a hinge off a door that doesn't really close anyway, just enough to charm a smile, maybe an evening of attention. The kind of trade that seems harmless when the sun is setting just right, and someone with soft eyes places a flower behind your ear like you're a gift worth wrapping. But then someone gets bold. A crewman you barely recognize, the one with the uneven beard and a fondness for questionable dice games, pries a plank loose from the foredeck. Not a small one either. A real piece of ship. The kind of timber that holds up stories. Literally. He drags it across the sand like a trophy and offers it with a flourish to a woman who looks at it, then at him, then back at the wood, and smiles like she's just been handed a secret. And that's how it begins. The ship starts disappearing in layers. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly, like a house being unbuilt by polite termites. Every exchange is greeted with joy. A chunk of railing earns a dance under the stars. A porthole cover buys someone an afternoon nap in a hammock that smells like coconut and decisions that don't end in paperwork. You see it happening, and for a while, you say nothing, because it looks like happiness. Until you wake one morning and notice the sound, or rather, the lack of it. The creak of the hull, normally a constant background groan like an old man muttering in his sleep, is gone. The wind hums through gaps that didn't exist the night before. There's a certain openness. You walk the deck and realize half of it has been rearranged in the name of courtship. The carpenter has posted himself beside the mizzenmast, arms crossed, eyes twitching. He's stopped using words and now communicates entirely in long sighs and choked groans. A group of sailors pass him carrying what looks like part of the forecastle ladder. He doesn't stop them. He just watches, defeated, like a father realizing the family dog has joined a traveling circus. You catch glimpses of the trades, men walking off into the palm groves with parts of the helm tucked under one arm and a garland of flowers in the other, a young midshipman carrying a drawer full of copper bolts like an offering to a god he just met. Two sailors holding a beam between them, arguing over whether it's worth more than a night in the beach hut with the thatched roof and the woman who smells like roasted vanilla. The ship is still afloat, technically, but it's starting to resemble a memory more than a vessel. Doors don't shut. Barrels roll across the deck because the wedges that once kept them in place are now earrings. The cook has had to nail the stew pot directly to the floor, and even then, he's taken to sleeping beside it with a stick. You confront one of the traders, ask him what he's thinking. He grins at you like you've forgotten how to live. He tells you he traded a support beam for an afternoon of singing and mangoes so ripe they tasted like dreams. You point out that support beams support things. He shrugs, says she sang into his mouth, says the ship never sang. You want to be furious. You want to bark orders and reclaim the wood and reassert the dignity of the Royal Navy. But then someone tugs your sleeve and hands you a sliver of carved ivory in the shape of a bird. No words, just a look. One that says, "Stay, breathe." Remember what it's like to be wanted without a title. You tuck the bird into your pocket. The captain tries to restore order. He speaks of duty, of mission, of the Queen's ship being slowly traded for fruit and fondling. But no one listens. Not really, because the ship was never the destination, just a means of escape, a way to reach a place where the air is thick with music and the sea doesn't judge. By dusk, a crewman is sketching new rigging plans using a stick and the damp sand. The carpenter sits beside him, nodding along with the resigned calm of a man building a new religion out of driftwood and stubbornness. And when you climb below deck that night, you notice starlight where there used to be timber. It shines through the ribs of the ship like it's trying to tell you something. Something gentle, something final. The captain finally loses it over a barrel of nails. He finds it missing mid-morning, after 2. Deckhands report that the stern now flexes like a hammock, and the stairs to the captain's cabin have mysteriously migrated to the shore. He storms out in full uniform, boots polished, hat rigid, jaw clenched with the force of a man who still believes hierarchy can survive tropical humidity and lightly perfumed diplomacy. He climbs the steps, what's left of them, and plants himself at the top of the quarterdeck, which someone has conveniently reduced to 3 wobbling planks and a prayer. Then he makes his speech. No more nails. No more hinges. No more brackets, beams, or brass fittings. No more removing vital ship parts in exchange for fruit, dance lessons, or amorous adventures, which he says in a tone that suggests he's been reading the logbooks more closely than anyone realized. He points a shaking finger at a crewman currently trying to pry a small hook from the door to the armory and says, in the steely voice of command, "That is an order." The man nods, smiles, goes right back to prying. You watch the whole thing from a safe distance, sipping something mildly fermented from a hollowed-out gourd and pretending not to notice that someone has woven flowers into your belt. The captain paces back and forth, muttering about honor, discipline, the Queen, and the visible sky shining through the deck above the midship bunks. He demands a tally of what's been traded. The first mate hands him a list so long it flutters in the wind like a wedding banner. He tries to crumple it, but the humidity turns it into a floppy scroll that refuses to wrinkle properly. Still, he persists. He summons the boatswain, the carpenter, even the cook, none of whom are much help. As one is asleep in a hammock traded for the ship's only crowbar, one is meditating beside a barrel of fish hooks. He's now calling his emergency currency, and the cook is in love and has stopped making soup in protest of the captain's tone. The crew listens patiently, or they look like they're listening. One man even salutes. Another makes a solemn vow to stop trading nails and immediately hands over his shoe buckle to a passing woman in exchange for a smile and a coconut pastry. The captain does not adjust well to being ignored. He attempts threats, docked pay, lashes, demotions. But it's hard to instill fear when half the crew is currently shirtless, slightly tanned, and draped in palm fronds, discussing local tattoo options with the serene joy of men who've remembered they have bodies. He tries reason, says the ship can't sail if it keeps falling apart like a drunken puppet theater. Someone counters that it can float just fine, and if not, the island's quite pleasant. Another offers to build him a new stern out of bamboo and good intentions. Eventually, he just starts pacing, barking orders into the wind, writing in his logbook with increasing violence, the quill scratching like it's seeking revenge. But the tide has turned. The crew has tasted freedom, or at least mangoes. They've fallen into a rhythm that doesn't involve bells, rations, or the lash. They rise with the sun, trade for what they want, sleep wherever they please, and answer mostly to the weather. Their uniforms are tattered but decorated. Their shoes are optional. Their loyalty has shifted to something less vertical. The chain of command has been gently disassembled and repurposed into fishing lures. At one point, the captain calls for a head count, and nobody moves. He yells for silence, and the birds outsing him. He commands a return to British values, and someone politely asks what those are. Exactly. By sundown, he's sitting alone on the remains of his command platform, surrounded by the ghost of a ship. He stares out at the horizon like it might offer him backup. It doesn't. It only offers stars. You walk past him on your way to share roasted breadfruit with someone who smells like salt and laughter. You nod. He does not nod back. But you think you see it in his eyes, a flicker of something quieter than surrender. The realization that out here, he may still hold the title, but he no longer holds the ship. You come ashore with a journal, a compass, and a sharp sense of purpose. There are measurements to be taken, topography to chart, vegetation to catalog. You have been trained for this. You are here on behalf of Empire, to observe and record and perhaps quietly imply ownership. Your boots are polished, your buttons fastened, your mind armored against distraction. You last exactly 12 minutes. It begins when someone hands you a coconut. Not just hands it to you, places it into your palm with both hands, as if it's not a fruit but an invitation. It's already been opened at the top, straw inserted, contents chilled by some unknowable natural magic. You take a sip because you are polite. Then you take another because your soul forgets it was supposed to resist. Someone else appears beside you, smiling, eyes bright, arms full of flowers, and what might be woven grass or some clever plant you're supposed to name later. They reach up, unbothered by rank or personal space, and begin arranging blossoms in your hair. You try to object, but your voice doesn't arrive. Just a small noise, followed by the realization that they are humming. You try again to focus. You pull out the compass, only to realize it's been turned into a makeshift plate for slices of roasted banana, now glistening and somehow warm despite the breeze. You chew thoughtfully. The journal remains closed. Your escorts, the local guides, you're not supposed to call. Friends begin leading you inland. The forest opens like a curtain. Shade wraps around your shoulders. Someone ties something soft around your wrist. You have no idea what it is, but you thank them anyway. Politeness is your last grip on professionalism, and it is beginning to slip. You ask a question about elevation and are answered with a song. You ask about the coastline and are handed a shell. You're starting to suspect they understand your language perfectly and are simply choosing not to answer in it. Time dissolves. You're standing in a clearing, barefoot, because someone explained using only eyebrows that shoes are an insult to the earth here. Your socks are drying on a branch like discarded protocol. The air smells like citrus and something floral you will never identify correctly in a report. The person beside you, whose name you can't pronounce but whose laughter you now recognize from across any beach, is showing you how to twist stems together into a chain. You are making a lay, not because you planned to, not because it was assigned, but because your hands are already doing it. The same fingers that once copied maps by candlelight are now looping petals into a circle with the kind of focus usually reserved for divine revelation or repairing torn sails. Your coat has been folded neatly and used as a seat cushion. Your hat is on someone else's head, and they're wearing it better. You're no longer certain where your compass is. The journal is definitely under a tree, being used as a cutting board for something juicy and suspiciously delicious. You laugh. Not the polite chuckle of an officer, but the kind that comes from deep in the chest, the kind that loosens things, your companion beams. They place the finished lei around your neck, adjust a flower tucked behind your ear, and say something that sounds like approval. You were supposed to be documenting trade routes. You are now debating whether or not to nap in a hammock made of bark fiber and promises. The thought crosses your mind just for a flicker that you might be in trouble. That back home, this would be frowned upon. That somewhere, someone would file this under dereliction, or cultural contamination, or worse, softness. But that flicker fades, because you've never felt more awake, more real, more present, not as a symbol, not as a rank, just as a human. Sitting cross-legged beneath a tree on an island that doesn't care who you are, only how gently you take up space. You still plan to finish the survey. You tell yourself you'll write everything down later. The names, the species, the tides, you'll remember it all. But for now, you let someone feed you a slice of starfruit, and you stay exactly where you are. They arrive just before midday, gliding across the sand in robes the color of moonlit coral, eyes sharp and calm like they've seen more centuries than you've seen birthdays. They are tall, serene, and painted with symbols that would give any British bishop heart palpitations. Your crew straightens up immediately, not from respect, but from the shared fear that these are the sorts of men who might be able to set a ship on fire just by looking at it. The priests do not speak first. They observe. One stands beside the cook, watching intently as he tries to recreate stew using 3 remaining nails and a dented pot. Another walks the deck barefoot, pausing to touch a railing that's been partially replaced with driftwood and optimism. One of them picks up a mirror from the bead chest and holds it to the sun, watching the light dance across his own cheek like he's been waiting for this moment his entire life. You gather your men. It seems appropriate to reciprocate. Show them what times you times do, what times your times beliefs look like. There's no church here, no organ, no parishioners in tidy rows, but there is a barrel, a clean patch of sand, and a deep, irrational conviction that your way still means something even if no one claps at the end. So you set up a modest ceremony. You select a mango because it's the ripest thing within arm's reach, and fruit feels symbolic enough. You position it carefully on a flat rock. Then you remove your hat, clear your throat, and begin reciting something that resembles a prayer but is mostly the opening paragraph of a field manual mixed with the Lord's Prayer and whatever your grandmother used to mutter when the tea kettle boiled over. The priests watch. They do not interrupt, though one does tilt his head like he's wondering if this is a burial or an exorcism. You reach the part where the mango is supposed to be blessed and, lacking holy water, gently pour some from your canteen. The mango rolls slightly. You stop it with one finger. You say, "Amen," like you're asking a question. There's a long silence. Then, one of the priests steps forward, lifts the mango, sniffs it, nods, and eats it. You're not sure if the ceremony has succeeded or been devoured. Afterward, they invite you to their own ritual, not with words, just a gesture, a smile, and a soft drumming that starts from somewhere deeper than music. You follow them to a grove that smells like incense and fresh rain. The crew comes too, trailing behind like boys at a fair. There are no pews, no sermons, just movement. The priests chant low and steady, voices weaving around each other like wind through stone. A woman steps forward, places something fragrant at your feet, and begins to dance not for you, but for the air, for the light, for whatever invisible thread they're all pulling from the earth. You try to understand. You watch closely. You nod at moments that feel sacred. You place your hand over your heart because it feels respectful, even though it also feels like pretending. At one point, a young priest offers you a bowl carved from bone and filled with something pungent and smoking. You take a sip. You see stars, then ancestors, possibly someone else's. By the end, you're swaying without meaning to. You clap at the wrong time, bow too deeply, and accidentally compliment someone's grandmother using the word for banana. But they smile. They let you try. They answer your confusion with patience, your awkwardness with laughter. Later that night, as the fire crackles and someone from the crew sings a hymn, just softly enough not to ruin it, one of the priests sits beside you. He points at the stars, names them in a language that feels round and warm. You try to offer the English names, but his sound better, like stories instead of science. You think back to the mango, the rock, the makeshift blessing. You wonder if they thought it was foolish, or touching, or both. They probably did, but they let you believe it mattered, just long enough to mean it. You wake up determined. Today is for science, for precision, for charts and measurements, and the kind of diligent note-taking that earns medals back home and footnotes in books no one actually reads. You dust the sand from your instrument case, square your shoulders like a man with purpose, and vow that nothing, not sunlight, not song, not the smell of roasting pineapple will distract you. Then the island exhales. It's not literal, but it might as well be. A warm breeze rolls over you with the grace of a sigh, smelling of sea salt and something faintly intoxicating, vanilla. Maybe, or some flower that only blooms when no one's watching. You blink, your compass tilts slightly. You tighten your grip on the journal, as though it can anchor you. You find the path to the ridge, the one that promises a clear view of the coastline. It winds upward through tangled brush, stone steps placed by no one but worn smooth anyway, and trees that lean just enough to suggest they're listening. The map in your hand is blank, but you're ready to fill it. You reach the first overlook and stop. Below, the shoreline curves like it's been sculpted by fingers that cared more about beauty than logic. The bays don't just form, they pose. Inlets wink from behind cliffs. A series of rocky outcroppings forms what you swear is a deliberate shape, something between a crescent and a beckoning hand. You try to measure the angle of the point, but end up staring at how the waves break against the rocks like they're rehearsing. This is not cartography. This is seduction. You take a breath and look around. Your assistant is missing again. He was supposed to be recording elevations, but last you saw of him, he was deep in conversation with someone in a woven skirt and an alarming command of metaphor. You call his name. Nothing. Just birdsong and the faint sound of someone laughing from somewhere it's probably inappropriate to yell into. You sit down. Just for a moment. The rocks are warm. The view is unfair. You open the journal, sketch the coastline as best you can, and find your lines curving even when they shouldn't. You're trying to be factual, but the land refuses to cooperate. Every contour begs to be described in poetry instead of coordinates. Every shadow teases some deeper meaning. It's a coastline, yes, but it's also a shoulder, a smile, a secret. You flip to a new page. This one will be proper, north pointed, labeled, professional. You manage 3 lines before a girl appears at the edge of your vision, holding something wrapped in leaves. She doesn't speak, just offers it like it's obvious you're hungry. You are. It's sweet and sticky and probably ruins the ink on your fingers, but you eat it anyway. She nods, satisfied, and vanishes back down the hill like a mirage with better manners. You forget what you were mapping. By afternoon, the sun turns gold. Your compass needle sticks briefly, then spins like it's changed its mind about magnetic truth. You sigh, turn the page again, and sketch a tree instead. Not because it's useful, but because it feels like the only honest thing to do. Its roots are tangled like thought. Its branches lean into the wind without asking why. Eventually, your assistant returns. His hair is damp, and there's something on his neck that might be lipstick or possibly a very specific kind of berry. He carries no notes, no readings, just a large grin and the firm belief that today was enlightening. You look at your sketches, not one of them useful to a navigator, but each of them strangely alive. You close the journal. You'll try again tomorrow, but tonight, you'll follow the sound of drums drifting over the ridge and let the stars rearrange your idea of direction. It begins with a sunbeam where no sunbeam should be. You're below deck, reaching for a barrel of rope, when a thin column of light catches the dust in the air and pauses you mid-reach. It pours in through a hole you're fairly certain wasn't there last week, or yesterday, or, for the sake of naval pride, ever. You lean closer. The light shifts slightly with the roll of the hull, casting a slow arc across the floorboards. A breeze follows it in, gentle and fragrant, smelling faintly of hibiscus and what might be fermented papaya. The ship is breathing. And not just through the usual cracks and seams, it's breathing through a dozen places you never authorized. You climb up to the deck, bracing for the worst. You find it. The ship has gone. Soft. Not in structure, though that's part of it. Soft in intention, in purpose. The railings sag slightly where support beams have been quietly borrowed. The rigging flutters with more fabric than function, and one of the lifeboats has been converted into what appears to be a love nest with a curtain and a potted plant. You see hammocks in strange places, sails dyed with what looks like fruit. Someone's painted a face on the cannon. A beam is missing near the stern, and in its place is a loosely arranged lattice of sticks and rope, which one sailor proudly refers to as open-air design. Another has installed seashells along the gunwale in a pattern that might be decorative or might be structurally desperate. You can't tell anymore. You call a meeting, or you try. The crew is scattered, most of them off ship or lounging in the shade of what used to be parts of your quarterdeck. One man is sunbathing on a plank that definitely belonged to the helm housing. Another is weaving a mat out of ropes that should be securing cargo. They wave at you with casual ease, like you're a neighbor with mild concerns about hedge trimming. You return to the captain's cabin, or what's left of it. There's a fresh hole in the ceiling, right above the chart table. You stare at it for a while, then check the charts. They've been repurposed into decorative fans. A crewman shrugs when you ask, says it gets warm in the afternoons and the islanders showed them how to fold the edges just so. He offers you one. It has a smiling sun drawn in the corner. Back on deck, someone refers to the new structural gaps as natural skylighting, says it improves morale, says nothing boosts a sailor's spirit like a bit of starlight between their toes. You ask what happens when it rains. They shrug again, say that's what tarps are for. You check. The tarps have been traded for tattoos and stories. By sundown, the ship resembles a memory of itself. The bones are there, but everything else has shifted. You hear laughter from below, music drifting in from shore, and a soft thud where someone just fell through a loose board and didn't bother to get up. You run your hand along a patched plank, feeling where the original grain gives way to something foreign and improvised. It holds, barely, but it holds. You want to be angry. You try. But the air is sweet, and the sea is calm, and your boots are dusted with flower petals that shouldn't be on a military vessel. You look out over the rail and see two of your crew paddling back from shore, with more trade goods and less clothing. One waves. The other is holding what appears to be a chair leg from your mess hall. You sigh. You stare at the stars through the new hole in your roof. They're brighter tonight. Maybe it's the open air. Maybe it's that, somehow, you've forgotten what this was supposed to feel like. The ship breathes again. So do you. By the time you reach the northern inlet, they already know you. Children point at your boots and giggle. A woman offers you a fish carved from driftwood and laughs when you try to ask what it means. Somewhere behind you, a boy mimics the way your assistant walks back straight, jaw high, as if good posture can substitute for charisma. They've heard things, seen things, imagined even more. You're no longer explorers. You're characters in a story passed from village to village like a well-loved shell, polished smooth by repetition and the occasional embellishment. The British, they say, arrive in massive wooden beasts that fall apart if you smile at them. They bring buttons that serve no purpose, wear shoes indoors, and blush if you compliment their knees. They trade metal like it's treasure, wince at the sun, and somehow never catch fish, even when handed both a net and instructions. They're sweet, a little lost, and according to a very confident older woman who insists she sampled the evidence, surprisingly attentive once you remove their uniforms and their dignity. You try to hold your chin high. You try to walk like a man of charts and reason, a servant of empire. But it's hard to command authority when someone has woven flower petals into your hat without you noticing, and small children are taking turns pretending to be you by squinting at leaves through the wrong end of your telescope. You pull aside a translator, one of the few from your party who still bothers with diplomacy, and ask how bad it's gotten. She sighs, thinks for a moment, then tells you the latest rumor involves a British sailor who can't swim but offered 3 nails for a kiss and cried when he was offered 5 for free. You ask who it was. She just looks at you. The rumors aren't cruel. They're fond, mostly, but they're specific. Your crew's habits have been catalogued with frightening precision. They know who snores, who sings in their sleep, who can't handle fermented taro without needing to sit down for a very long time. There's a myth now born 2 villages over about a sailor who speaks to birds and another who tried to court a coconut tree. There's a small mural depicting the latter, painted in red clay on a hut wall. He's smiling in it. The tree is not. Worse still, you're being used as currency. The islanders have begun referencing you in negotiations. One of them gave me 5 nails for a kiss, says one girl, arms crossed, bargaining for a better fish hook. Mine gave me a hinge, replies another. Mine carved his initials into a coconut and told me it was poetry. You are, through no fault of your own, part of the local economy now. A walking standard of emotional inflation. You try to retreat into work. You insist on more mapping, more surveying, more logging of local flora. You assign your men to document wave patterns and soil content. You demand that all interactions be recorded in the ship's journal. But the journal keeps disappearing. And when you find it, it contains sketches of flowers and, once, a very flattering drawing of someone who may or may not be you, reclining under a banana leaf, with a smirk you're fairly certain you've never actually made. You consider a formal announcement, something stern, something clarifying. But before you can gather the crew, a man from the next village over arrives with a necklace made of fish bones and a message. Tell the red-faced one with the freckles he's invited back. Also, he left his shoe. It's not just gossip anymore. It's legacy. You sigh, adjust your collar, and try not to trip on the carved stick figure of yourself someone has thoughtfully planted in the sand. You're not sure if it's a warning or a tribute, possibly both. You look out over the bay, where your ship, what's left of it, rests like a tired guest overstaying its welcome. The sun dips low. Another drumbeat rolls across the water. Your name floats behind it, followed by laughter. You're not sure who told the story this time, but you're certain it wasn't you. You call the meeting just after sunrise, while the heat is still a suggestion and not yet a threat. The crew gathers slowly, yawning, adjusting sashes and beads and whatever loosely qualifies as uniform these days. Someone shows up barefoot. Someone else is chewing something green and clearly illegal in at least 3 ports. One man arrives with a parrot on his shoulder, and you're not entirely sure where the parrot came from or why it appears to be whispering secrets into his ear. You stand on what remains of the quarterdeck, now slightly springy due to the suspicious absence of 2 supporting beams, and clear your throat. Gentlemen, you begin, because it still feels good to pretend. They quiet down. To their credit, they do look at you, not with disdain, not even with boredom, but with the patient eyes of men waiting to see if you're about to say something that requires shoes or actual consequences. You speak of duty, of queen and country, of naval code and the fragile illusion of order. You use words like dignity and decorum, though the latter gets a small giggle from someone who probably thinks it's a fruit. You remind them that the ship, despite its current tendency to whistle when the wind hits it just right, is still a commissioned vessel of His Majesty's fleet. They nod. They even murmur agreement when you say that trading parts of the ship for kisses, pastries, or experimental tattoos is technically frowned upon. You feel a flicker of hope. Then Wilkinson, the one who used to be a carpenter and now fancies himself a poet, raises a hand. You pause. He asks, very politely, whether hinges are specifically listed as off-limits in the Code of Conduct. You blink. He smiles. Then, as if demonstrating a legal loophole in real time, he pulls a door hinge from his pocket and walks off the deck with the swagger of a man on a mission. You sigh. You try not to look, but of course you do. From the rail, you see him reach a woman waiting at the edge of the beach. He holds out the hinge. She inspects it with the expertise of a blacksmith and the poise of a queen. Then she leans in, kisses him once on the cheek, and hands him a pineapple so perfectly golden it might as well be enchanted. They walk off together, chatting like old friends. You turn back to the crew. Someone's already left. 2 more are whispering about whether door latches count as hinges. Another is sketching something in the dirt with a stick. You think it might be a redesign for the crow's nest or a recipe for banana liquor. Possibly both. You press on. You remind them that the ship cannot leave if it keeps falling apart one flirtation at a time. That every nail, every bracket, every slat of wood removed from the hull is one more reason you'll be living here indefinitely. Someone cheers at that. You glare. They stop. You try one last tactic. Emotion. You speak. Not of orders, but of purpose. Of why you're here. The voyage. The maps. The legacy. The strange and delicate act of discovering something without breaking it. You tell them this was never meant to be about nails or pineapples or late-night drum circles that end with someone crying under a palm tree. It was about history. About being remembered. There's a pause, a longer one this time. You feel, briefly, that something might have landed. Then a hand shoots up. It's the cook. He asks if he can trade the galley door. Says it's heavy, nearly new, and he's been promised a tattoo of a sea turtle that dances when he flexes. You don't answer. You just close your eyes. Later, the door is gone. So is the cook. The ship groans softly when the tide rises, and you hear someone, somewhere, hammering a rhythm against the hull that definitely isn't for repairs. You sit down, not in defeat, but in understanding. Whatever this is, it's no longer command. It's weather. You can shout into it, chart it, curse it, but you can't steer it. You simply ride it. And hope the keel holds just long enough to see what happens next. You tell yourself this is anthropology, important work, the kind that fills books and museum exhibits. You clutch your journal like it's a moral compass and not a slightly damp notebook with a suspicious smear of fruit jam across page 4. You write the words cultural exchange in crisp script, underline them twice, and add a small star in the margin, as if that might convince posterity this was all intentional. Around you, the crew is deeply engaged in something that could generously be called experimentation and more accurately described as furniture surgery. A table, once the proud centerpiece of the captain's quarters, is now lying on its back with its legs removed and replaced with hollowed coconut shells lashed on with strips of bark. You are watching grown men reinvent interior design with the fevered confidence of people who've inhaled too much fermented fruit and praise. One of them taps the newly affixed coconut with a spoon and declares it resonant. Another nods solemnly and asks if the table has a name yet. You close the journal for a moment and wonder what your professors back home would say if they saw this. Probably something long-winded about the elasticity of civilization, probably in Latin. You look around for evidence of actual progress. There's a hammock made from old sails and dried vines, a bench constructed from crates and carved turtle shells, a cupboard, once used for powder, now lined with flower petals and someone's attempt at poetry burned into the wood with a hot spoon. It rhymes, but barely. It's all beautiful in a way that defies logic, which is exactly the problem. Your ship is no longer a ship. It's a floating craft fair, a living gallery of compromise and questionable carpentry. And the crew? They're thriving. A man who hasn't spoken more than 6 words in a row since Gibraltar is now teaching knotwork to 3 Tahitian boys, all of whom have outpaced him in both speed and sass. The surgeon is carving spoons. The quartermaster has taken up song. You write more words. Integration, adaptation, mutual curiosity. None of them sound convincing, even in your own head, because while your men are sharing language and laughter and possibly diseases, you're still trying to document the chaos like it can be footnoted. You're not resisting, exactly, just narrating as the tide carries you along, pretending it's still your hand on the wheel when the wheel itself is now part of someone's art installation. At some point, a local woman sits beside you and offers you a carved comb. She doesn't speak English, and you've forgotten the proper phrase in Tahitian, so you just smile and take it. She reaches up, runs it once through your sun-dried hair, and nods approvingly, as if you've passed some quiet test. Then she points to your journal, flips it open, and draws a fish in the corner of your map. You don't stop her, because at this point, what is a map but a suggestion? What is a coastline but a conversation between land and water, redrawn with every tide? You start to say something clever, but she's already gone, the comb left in your lap like a punchline. Later, you walk the deck, if you can still call it that. Someone has woven flowers through the railing. The mast is painted with a swirling pattern of blues and reds that weren't there yesterday. A dog you do not own is sleeping beside the helm. You write again. This time, we came to observe, but we're being rewritten. You consider underlining it. You don't. Because by now, the ink is running, and you're not sure who the author is anymore. You're told it's an honor, a formal welcome, the kind of ceremony meant to stitch bonds between cultures with food and music and unspoken evaluations. You dress as best you can, which, at this point, means a cleanish shirt, a belt not currently holding up part of the main mast, and the last button you haven't accidentally traded away. The chief sits beneath a carved wooden canopy, draped in fabrics that ripple like water and edged with shells that shimmer without needing polish. His presence is both casual and immense, like someone who could rearrange your future with a shrug but prefers to watch you flounder first. He gestures for you to sit beside him on woven mats, and you do so with all the grace of someone who hasn't sat cross-legged since boyhood. A servant places roasted pig before you, its skin glistening with something sweet and vaguely intimidating. Bananas follow, peeled and stacked in precise spirals. There's a drink too cold, sharp, slightly fizzy, possibly forbidden by at least 2 naval regulations. You nod politely and try not to visibly calculate how long it's been since you had anything this fresh that didn't come with maggots. He watches you eat. Not cruelly, not with suspicion, more like someone observing a slightly off-tempo musician still playing the right notes, just in the wrong rhythm. He speaks slowly, thoughtfully. Your translator shifts beside you, face tightening every few words, before leaning in with a smile that barely hides concern. He says the food is a gift, she says, and that your presence brings laughter, confusion, and fresh plumbing. You pause. He means the nails, she adds. Your crew has given so many. They've built an entire bathing platform. He says it's very stable. You chew slower, the chief continues. His tone is light, amused, but his eyes flick down toward the beach, where your ship rests like a sunburned guest, too proud to admit it's overstayed its welcome. You follow his gaze. The sails are drying on the sand. 2 locals are using your cannon as a towel rack. A child is playing on what used to be the gangway, now transformed into a slide with coconut oil and very little safety. The translator clears her throat again. He says, your ship is very beautiful, and that it's generous. He asks if it has always been this generous, or if this is seasonal behavior. You look back at the chief. He raises a cup in your direction, smiling like he's just told a joke and is waiting to see if you understand the punchline. You raise your own cup in return, because that's easier than explaining that no, This is not a seasonal behavior. This is what happens when discipline dissolves into opportunity and sailors begin measuring value in embraces and fruit. He speaks again, longer this time. The translator listens closely, then translates with some hesitation. He says that, if you choose to remain, he will assign your men to different families. Your ship has already given so much. It is, he says, part of the island now. You set your cup down slowly. You ask her to repeat it. She does. Part of the island now. You glance at the coastline again. The hull, patched with local wood. The rigging, retied with island knots. The railings, painted with patterns you've never seen in any admiral's log. It isn't a metaphor. It's geography. You thank the chief. You smile. You chew the banana with the exaggerated appreciation of someone trying to stall for time. He doesn't press you. He's polite after all. But he knows, the way old trees know storms are coming long before the clouds arrive. Later, as the ceremony winds down and the sun dips behind the trees, you sit beside your ship and try to imagine it sailing again. Try to imagine pulling it free of the roots it's grown in the sand, the lives that have twined through its planks, the laughter that echoes from its repurposed deck. You imagine it, and it feels like theft. You run your fingers along the hull and find a new carving spirals within spirals, the symbol for belonging, and for the first time, you wonder what exactly it is you're still captain of. It starts with a tooth. A sailor from another village arrives with cheeks puffed like a toad and a jaw clenched tighter than your ship's dwindling rations. The surgeon, your surgeon, the same man who once panicked over a splinter in his own thumb, asks him to sit on an overturned crate and calmly extracts a molar the size of a marble using a pair of tongs and what looks suspiciously like a fork. The crowd winces. The patient screams once, then smiles, broadly, bloodily. He gives the surgeon a woven sash and 3 baked yams, bows deeply, and walks away humming. You assume this is a one-time event. It is not. By the next day, a line has formed. Islanders from nearby villages bring ailments, injuries, and the occasional curious mole. The surgeon takes them one by one. He doesn't ask for payment, but he doesn't stop people from giving it either. Some offer fruit, others carvings or beads. One hands him a tattoo artist, not a drawing, a person. The surgeon accepts this with the solemn dignity of a man deeply unsure how to refuse body art. By evening, he has a crescent moon inked on his forearm, a plate of candied taro in his lap, and a small child tugging on his sleeve, asking if he can make her taller. You confront him, or you try. He's busy treating a man with a thorn in his foot. You wait politely as he removes it, disinfects the wound with something floral and suspicious, and tells the patient to avoid dancing for a day. The patient nods, bows, and hands over a necklace made from shark teeth. When you finally corner him, he looks at you with the calm certainty of someone who knows he is doing important work and that you are, at best, a background character in it. You remind him, sternly, that he is a naval officer. He reminds you, gently, that he hasn't seen a naval anything in weeks. He gestures at the ship, which currently has 2 fishing nets drying over what used to be the helm. You tell him he's undermining discipline. He tells you he's lowering fevers. You threaten to revoke his rum privileges. He offers you a yam. The surgeon becomes impossible to schedule. He floats between settlements like a folk hero, appearing with his little pouch of tools and that unnervingly serene smile. He learns names, listens to complaints, applies poultices that smell like overripe basil and somehow work anyway. Children run to greet him. Elders nod as he passes. Even the dogs seem to like him. Your authority, meanwhile, evaporates like rain on hot stone. You give orders that echo hollow through empty decks. Your journals pile up with notes that no one will read. You try to reassign duties, but the crew has already decided their new rotations: fishing, flirting, and occasionally building shrines to a functioning gastrointestinal system. One morning, you wake to find a group of villagers clustered around the surgeon, painting his likeness on a smooth piece of driftwood. He stands still for it, one hand resting on a satchel, the other holding a mango like a scepter. They paint him taller, glowing, even. The resemblance is aspirational at best, but the admiration is clear. Later, you catch a sailor trading a bandage for a story. "He saved a man's ear," he says, voice hushed with reverence. "Stitched it right back on, good as new." You remember that ear. It wasn't on right. It faced slightly backward, like it was listening to something from last week. But the myth is louder than the truth now. By week's end, the surgeon has a hut of his own. It has flowers at the entrance, a waiting area shaded by palm leaves, and a wind chime made from discarded spoons. Someone carved "House of Healing" above the door. The letters aren't straight, but the message is, you stand outside it one night, watching the line form again. The surgeon emerges, waves at you, offers you a seat. You decline. You are no longer the heart of the expedition. You're its historian, and the surgeon, damn him, is the headline. You begin the day with resolve, not the kind born from moral clarity or divine inspiration, but the exhausted sort that creeps in after watching another of your men exchange an entire navigational chart for a coconut bra and a knowing smile. You've had enough. The chaos, the collapse of naval hierarchy, the suspicious squeaking sounds echoing from the aft cabin at all hours. It's time, you decide, to reclaim the mission. Science, discovery, the noble pursuit of knowledge. You select a journal, the good one, not the one with pineapple stains and a smeared doodle of what might be a mermaid or a very sad fish. You choose your best quill, inspect your ink, and march into the forest with the upright gait of a man who is absolutely not going to get distracted. The island, of course, does not care. It greets you with warmth and smell and noise. Petals fall from trees like confetti. Insects hum in harmonies. Birds flash through the canopy like living sparks. You breathe it all in and press forward, purposeful, focused, chaste. You find a grove of strange ferns with leaves that curl when touched. Fascinating. You sit beneath a tree, arrange your supplies, and begin to sketch. The lines come slowly at first, your hands stiff from disuse and emotional constipation. But soon the rhythm returns. You capture the curve of a stem, the fan of its fronds, the shimmer where sunlight breaks across dew. You do not think about the laughter you passed on the beach. You do not think about the woman who offered you a mango and the opportunity to discuss Tahitian numerals in a private lagoon. You certainly do not think about the night you spent under the stars learning the local names for all the constellations, none of which correspond to anything you've ever seen in an almanac. You're working. You're learning. You're noble. Then a voice. Soft, inquisitive. You look up and she's there. Mid-20s maybe. Eyes too large. Smile too calm. A woven crown of something fragrant resting on her head like she was born with it. She says something in her language, gestures to your sketch, tilts her head in interest. You respond with what you hope is the word for fern and not snake. She laughs, not unkindly. She sits, not across from you, beside you, close enough to smell of hibiscus and salt. You shift slightly. She doesn't. You go back to drawing. She watches. You explain what you're doing in slow, clumsy syllables, miming leaf structure and root systems. She nods, mimics you, touches the stem with deliberate curiosity. You draw faster, encouraged by the shared moment of scientific wonder. She leans in to see the page. Her thigh touches yours. It's fine. You adjust the journal. She points to your sketch, then to the actual plant, then says something with a rise in pitch that you think is a question. You nod. She nods. You begin labeling the parts. You reach for your ink bottle. It rolls slightly. She steadies it. With her legs still pressed to yours, she offers her lap. You hesitate. She pats it once. You place the journal on her thigh, like it's a desk made of curiosity and social risk. She grins. You start drawing again. The surface is surprisingly stable. Her skin is warm. The ferns are still interesting, technically, but the line work gets sloppy around the edges. She hums a song under her breath, something rhythmic and soft, and definitely not helpful to your concentration. You try labeling the species. Your pen drags slightly, catching on a goosebump that wasn't there a moment ago. You stop. She turns her head toward you, eyes laughing. You are no longer doing science. You are participating in a very different form of observation. You do not close the journal. That would be admitting something. You just hold it there, balanced delicately between a leaf and a decision, while the sunlight shifts and the birds continue to sing songs you don't understand but suddenly feel fluent in. You had tried celibacy for science, but science apparently had other plans. He arrives in the early afternoon, sunburnt, cross, and coated in a layer of moral certainty thick enough to stop a bullet. You hear him before you see him, something about damnation, the fall of man, and fornication occurring within sight of a cannon. His voice is ragged, pitched high by either conviction or heat stroke, and he parts the underbrush like an angry prophet in borrowed shoes. You rise from your spot beneath a tree, where you'd been cataloging an unusually large species of beetle and attempting to ignore the hammock squeaking rhythmically somewhere behind the surgeon's hut. The man stumbles into the clearing, eyes wide, mouth agape. He freezes like someone has slapped him with theology. Before him lies your encampment, shirts tied into makeshift sunshades, boots drying beside coconut shells, a sailor painting flowers onto what used to be a rudder. Nearby, 3 Tahitian women are teaching 2 crewmen how to dance using gestures that suggest both agriculture and something distinctly less. Agrarian. The missionary gapes. His mouth opens, then closes, then opens again, like his soul is trying to load a new set of commandments. You extend a hand. He doesn't take it. I've walked for 2 days, he announces, chest heaving, and what I find is a hive of idleness and lust. You nod politely. Offer water. He refuses. You offer wine. He snatches it like a man trying to prove a point. 1 sip, then another. He wipes his mouth on his sleeve and launches into a sermon with all the subtlety of a hurricane made entirely of guilt. He paces, gestures, cites scripture, mentions Sodom twice. You try to listen, but it's difficult to concentrate when he keeps gesturing to a pair of sailors learning to weave baskets with their shirts off and an air of deep focus. You explain, gently, that the men are relaxed, that morale is high, that cultural exchange is underway in more directions than anyone anticipated. He stares. Someone hands him breadfruit. He accepts it instinctively, like the hand of God might be hiding inside. He bites it. The speech stumbles. This isn't about food, he mutters, but the sentence is already crumbling in the face of roasted starch and natural sugars. He eats again, slower this time, thoughtfully. You suggest he sit. He does. The dance lesson continues in the background. A flute begins playing from somewhere nearby. The missionary blinks like he's just remembered he has skin. His foot taps once, then again. A local elder arrives and sits beside him. They don't share a language, but they share a mango. He laughs at something he doesn't understand. She pats his hand anyway. By sunset, he's still in the same spot. His sermon now a quiet conversation about farming techniques and the structural soundness of the hut someone is building from driftwood and good intentions. You pass by with a journal under your arm and an expression you hope says welcome and not told you so. He waves. Not a big wave. Not yet, but a wave. The next morning, you find him wrapped in a sarong that was, until recently, a spare sail. He's seated beneath a tree, carving something into the bark with the end of a spoon. He greets you with a nod and asks, casually, if the breadfruit is always this tender. You ask if he'll be heading back soon. He looks out toward the water, where your ship floats like a distant memory, patched and peaceful. He chews on the answer for a moment, then shakes his head. "Not just yet," he says, then asks if there's any more of that mango wine. It starts like most bad decisions, quietly, and with the kind of confidence only half-drunk men with sunburned thighs and deeply flawed ideas can muster. The cannon sits near the edge of camp, a squat iron relic hauled ashore weeks ago to serve as a vague symbol of authority. No one's fired it since arrival, though it has been used to dry fish, prop up laundry, and once as an anchor point for a limbo competition that ended in 2 sprained ankles and 1 lasting friendship. Tonight, it's a different story. They circle it like scavengers around a carcass. 4 sailors, shirtless, barefoot, still damp from the sea and smelling of roasted breadfruit and poor impulse control. They don't speak much, just nod, grin, and begin. The first bolt comes out easier than expected. You'd think there'd be hesitation, some recognition of the line being crossed. But when you've already traded 6 window panes for a bundle of feathers and an unsolicited neck massage, certain lines blur without ever making a sound. The bolts go into a basket. A 5th man joins them with a crowbar and a story about someone who needs fasteners for a new outrigger. It might be true. It might not. No one asks. The cannon groans softly under their hands, metal fatigued and insulted, but also slightly resigned. They work steadily, rhythmically, in the golden hush before dawn, when even bad ideas can feel ordained. By morning, it's done. The cannon is still there, technically, but it's less a weapon now and more a suggestion, a hollow tube with aspirations. It lists slightly, like it knows something is missing but can't quite articulate the betrayal. You wake to birdsong and the sound of someone trying to hammer with a seashell. The ship, what's left of it, rests in the shallows. At first glance, nothing's changed, but then you notice the angle, subtle, a soft lean to port, like a drunk bowing mid-conversation. You squint, tilt your head, then straighten up and pretend you didn't see anything. So does everyone else. No roll call, no investigation, just a communal shrug of the soul. The listing is explained away as tide, wind, maybe the weight of too many coconuts in one hold. Theories bloom and die before noon. The truth hovers, obvious and impolite. At lunch, one sailor asks casually if the gunpowder's been moved. Another replies, equally casual, that powder's no good without bolts. There's laughter, the kind that has teeth in it, but no one pushes. You consider asking for the bolts back. You consider writing to the Admiralty about this moment, capturing it for history. Instead, you jot down something vague about topographical shifts and settle into the sand with your notes and a piece of boiled yam. Discipline, it seems, doesn't break in thunder. It crumbles. It peels, flakes, dissolves into barter and silence, and a shared understanding that the mission is now secondary to survival, and survival has become surprisingly pleasant. That night, someone plays music on a flute made from what you're almost certain used to be part of the main mast. People dance. The stars come out. You sit with the captain. Neither of you speaks of the ship, of the cannon, of the future. You both just watch the sway of people who no longer look homesick. You sip from a cup you didn't ask for and couldn't refuse. The fire crackles. A child giggles somewhere beyond the to light. You lean slightly to the left, just enough to feel it, and say nothing. It begins with flowers, dozens of them, woven into garlands, tucked behind ears, scattered along the path that leads from your battered encampment to the village clearing. You're summoned with ceremony, escorted by 2 children who take their job with the solemn gravity of tiny diplomats. You walk barefoot, your boots missing since last week when someone used the soles to patch a canoe. No one minds. You've adapted. Everyone has. The clearing is humming with life. Bright cloths spread across benches, roasted pigs smoking in a pit, fruit piled in dramatic mounds, daring you to define abundance. Everyone is smiling, The entire village, it seems, has assembled. Even the chief, seated cross-legged with a cup of something fermented and judgment-proof in hand. You're ushered to a place of honor-woven mat, elevated slightly, shaded by a clever arrangement of leaves and sails that used to belong to your ship. You nod in gratitude, still trying to figure out what you're being celebrated for. Scientific discovery, cultural exchange, the fact that the cannon now doubles as a fruit stand. People come forward with gifts, a carved bowl, a comb made from bone, a necklace strung with shells, and what might be the last of your ship's original nails. You smile, bow, accept. You're not entirely sure what's happening, but it feels warm, and you haven't eaten this well in weeks. Then comes the speech. The chief stands, clears his throat. A hush falls. He speaks in measured tones, calm, but with the unmistakable rhythm of someone delivering a sermon or possibly a plea. He gestures occasionally, once to the ship, once to the forest, once directly at you. It's not angry, not even stern, just deeply earnest. Your translator sits beside you, young, bright-eyed, mostly fluent in both languages and entirely fluent in island politics. She listens, nods, folds her hands, and finally leans in close. They are concerned, she says gently. You pause with a piece of mango halfway to your mouth. Concerned? Yes, they say you are, forgetting your purpose, your ship. Your bones are still pointed at the sea, but your hands are all tangled up here. You blink. She continues, with the delicacy of someone explaining to a child why fire is not for hugging. They say you trade too much, for nails, for kisses, for small things that feel large when the moon is up and your thoughts are soft. You look around, at the men you command, or used to. One is napping in the sun with a lei draped across his chest. Another is teaching a group of local boys how to whistle through a keyhole that no longer has a door attached. Someone has painted their face with ashes and is dancing without irony. They like you, she adds, but they think you are stuck, not like trapped, like rooted. And they know that ships are not trees. You sit with that. The feast continues. Music rises. A girl laughs and tosses petals into the air like confetti made of kindness. You chew slowly, tasting every bite with the sudden realization that this might be goodbye, if you're brave enough. Later, the chief toasts you. He uses a word that means guest and also drifting star. You raise your cup, smile, and drink something sweet that tastes faintly like memory. You realize, slowly, that this wasn't a celebration. It was an intervention, polite, generous, drenched in hospitality and subtle reproach, a reminder that paradise isn't permanent and that affection, while generous here, isn't meant to be bartered for forever. That night, as the fires burn low and the music softens into silence, you walk alone to what remains of your ship. You place a hand on the hull, feel the gaps, the uneven patches, the echo of laughter from deep within its bones. You don't need a translator to understand what the island has told you. It's time to rebuild. The palm tree doesn't ask much of you. Shade, a breeze, and the gentle creak of fronds above your head. You lie there in the sand, bare feet dug in like roots, watching the ocean shift in hues too complex to name with British vocabulary. Somewhere to your left, a man is humming and shaping a canoe out of what used to be your ship's pantry. He's doing it with more grace than any carpenter you've ever paid. You exhale, long and low, the kind of breath that carries weeks of mildew, discipline, and logistical spreadsheets out into the wide blue nothing. This wasn't the plan. You were supposed to catalog, to observe, to nod wisely, and write things down in passive voice. You were going to measure longitude and discover things that already had names. Your duty was to map, not melt. But now, days have names you forget and nights don't need watches. You've grown suspiciously tan. Your knees creak less. You catch yourself smiling before your morning tea substitute, which is now some sort of root infusion you've learned to stop questioning. You consider, For the second time this morning, whether you're still British, your hat disappeared in week 2. Your waistcoat is now a curtain somewhere. Your sense of colonial superiority eroded the day a local girl beat you at arm wrestling and then politely offered to carry your notebook for you. The empire feels very far away. You reach for your journal, open to a page titled Observations on Native Governance. It contains 3 drawings of flowers and a sentence about communal fishing practices that trails off into a sketch of someone's ankles. You flip forward. More of the same. You haven't written a paragraph about trade winds in days. Instead, you've been thinking, not just the practical kind, like how to waterproof a roof with banana leaves, or whether it's acceptable to eat breadfruit 7 days in a row. Bigger things, slippery things, what it means to belong to a place, whether conquest is just a story you tell yourself to keep from admitting you're lost. Whether pleasure, shared freely and without expectation, is a form of truth. You scratch at your neck where a necklace now hangs, made of shells and patience and something you still can't identify. A gift. No strings, just welcome. Out at sea, the ship still floats. Technically, you and the carpenter have been reinforcing it slowly, piece by salvaged piece. There's talk of leaving, quiet talk, deferred like a debt no one's in a hurry to collect. You watch the waves. They're not asking you to leave. They're not asking you to stay, either. They just keep coming, patient and full of secrets, smoothing out every footprint like they've been doing this long before you arrived and will keep going long after. You wonder if this is what failure feels like, and then immediately discard the thought. There's nothing failing about the way the light hits the water, or the way your crew has started greeting each sunrise with something like peace instead of orders. Maybe this isn't collapse. Maybe it's a soft shift, a recalibration, a group of accidental men unlearning a language of possession and remembering how to live inside a moment. You lean back against the tree and close your eyes. You try to picture Westminster, the damp halls, the scratch of wool and policy, men arguing over lines on maps they've never seen. You imagine trying to explain any of this to them. The flowers, the laughter, the fact that you know 6 different words now for tide and none for colonize. You fail, and it doesn't matter, because the sun is warm, the sand is soft, and someone is calling your name not urgently, just in case you'd like to come eat. It begins as a ripple, a distant smudge on the horizon that doesn't match the sea's usual rhythm. You squint, trying to convince yourself it's nothing. Just a trick of the light, a passing cloud, the ocean stretching its shoulders. But it grows, darkens, shifts shape with intent. You know weather when it means business. By the time the wind arrives, it's already too late to pretend. You sprint down the beach, heart in your throat, rain in your teeth. The crew scrambles in every direction, some toward the ship, some away from it, as if hoping to outrun the physics of a floating thing with half its bones held together by wishful thinking and old rope. Thunder cracks once, then again, louder this time, like the skies just realized what kind of ship it's dealing with and decided to go full dramatic. She still floats, barely. You see her bobbing in the shallows like a stubborn myth, patchy, patched, and part shrine now. Someone's woven flowers into the railings. Someone else appears to be using the wheel to dry fish. Neither detail inspires confidence. You clamber aboard. The deck's already slick, the sails limp and tangled, and the rigging is mostly decorative at this point. You shout something about bracing, about weathering the blow, but it's hard to sound commanding when the main hatch slams open behind you and a soaked sailor presents a coconut in both hands like it might help. A wave hits. Not large, but pointed. It slaps the hull with the same energy as a school teacher who's just found you doodling in the margins again. The ship lists. You grip a post what used to be a table leg, you're pretty sure, and shout for ballast. Use the crates, someone yells. Which crates? The breadfruit ones, someone else shouts back, already hollowed out for drums. Another voice, calm and deeply unhelpful, suggests, "I've got a banana peel." You stare at him. He shrugs. "Slippery. Might repel water." Lightning slices the sky open. The rain triples. The ship groans beneath you. A long, aching complaint from wood that remembers being trees and now just wants to be left alone. The captain appears beside you, soaked, wild-eyed, and gripping a ladle like a weapon. He asks if there's a plan. You look around. The crew is holding the ship together with muscle, prayer, and sheer denial. One man is bailing with his boot. Another is tying rope to a decorative canoe paddle he swears is stabilizing the stern. None of this is strategy. All of it is happening. You glance toward the island. It's so close, tauntingly close, safe, rooted, dryish, but you can't turn back now. Not because of pride or duty or any noble nonsense, just physics. The wind has her now. The sea is steering. The squall hits full force. For a moment, everything is noise and spray. Your hat flies off. A sail snaps loose like it's finally had enough of colonial expectations. The mast groans. You brace, scream a command that no one hears, and prepare to meet Neptune in the least dignified way possible. Then, stillness. Not complete, but comparative. The kind of stillness that follows chaos and feels like a trap. The rain slows. The wind shifts. The boat steadies not because of anything you did, but because storms, like tempers, eventually exhaust themselves. You stand there, soaked and clinging to a post with a missing screw. Around you, the crew collapses into heaps of breath and disbelief. Someone laughs. That high-pitched, hysterical laugh that happens right after death forgets to collect your ticket. Someone else sneezes. The banana peel floats gently by your foot. You stare at it, then at the sky, then at the island, still there, still waiting, like a parent who told you not to run with scissors and is now just watching the fallout unfold. You breathe, deep, salty, slightly fungal. You're not dead. The ship's not sunk. But she's not a ship anymore, really. She's a very determined raft with dreams of her former self. You pat the rail. She creaks back. It's the closest thing to a conversation you've had all day that feels honest. You survived, barely. And somewhere in the chaos, a crate of breadfruit became part of the port side. You don't ask questions. You just start to bail. You wake with resolve. Today is the day. The time has come to pull anchor, lift spirits, and sail boldly into the horizon with the confidence of men who have totally not dismantled their ship for recreational romance. You gather the crew with a speech in mind, something stirring about duty and the return to civilization. But most of them are already aboard, looking less like seamen and more like a troupe of weary artisans who've recently learned coconut wood does not hold nails well. The ship is listing again. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest she's sulking. You approach her like a disappointed father, about to deliver tough love to a child who's eaten glue. She creaks before you touch her. The gangplank moans like it's seen too much. Still, you persist. Sails are hauled up. Ropes are untangled with the same energy one uses to resolve a family argument at a wedding loudly and with barely restrained passive aggression. The wind is fair. The crew has been bribed into coherence with dried mangoes and the promise of discipline once you're offshore. The anchor is raised. Or rather, it's supposed to be. 3 men pull. Then 2 more. Then someone points out it's caught on something. You look over the side. It's a pig. A very annoyed pig, tangled in the anchor rope and glaring up at you like this is your fault, which, depending on how you define leadership, it might be. You free the pig. It paddles indignantly toward shore. The anchor comes up. The ship does not move. You check the rudder. It's intact, in that it exists. The tiller works, but you quickly discover that half the rudder has been replaced with something that used to be a cabinet door. You don't ask from where. Someone suggests prayer. Someone else suggests more nails. Someone else just sits down, removes his shirt, and begins carving a flute. You try again. Sails up. Crew in position. Anchor clear, wind in your favor. You order the ship to move like it's a stubborn mule. She responds by making a sound like a yawn and rocking in place. That's when you notice it. The hull. You run a hand along her side. Splinters. A bend where there should be curve. Sections replaced with driftwood, bamboo, an actual headboard from a Tahitian hut. She's not refusing to leave out of disobedience. She physically cannot. The ship has, in your absence, transformed into a tropical bed and breakfast with ambitions of retirement. You sit on a barrel, one that smells faintly of breadfruit moonshine, and stare at the horizon. There's no mutiny, no rebellion, just collective exhaustion and one very tired vessel held together by the salty version of hope. You begin to feel it too, the ache behind the eyes, the growing suspicion that maybe, just maybe, this is where the journey ends. Not with a triumphant return, but with you negotiating travel plans with a boat that has legally become a residence. A bird lands on the mast. It tilts. Not the bird, the mast. You blink slowly, as though your eyelids might somehow erase what you've just seen. You tap the mast gently. It wobbles like a drunk uncle at a wedding toast. You turn to the crew. Nobody looks surprised. You take a breath and begin reworking your plan. Perhaps, you tell them, the ship simply needs rest, reinforcement, a farewell blessing. Perhaps another day or two. Nobody objects. A few begin untying things. Someone starts singing. The ship lets out one long, satisfied creak. And you close your eyes and wonder when, exactly, you stopped being the captain and became the person asking permission to leave from your own furniture. You stand before them with the sternest face you can muster, which isn't easy when half the crew is shirtless and the other half is using their shirts as hammocks. You clear your throat, announce it's time. Repairs begin today. There's silence at first, the kind usually reserved for funerals or public floggings. Then someone coughs. Someone else quietly mutters something about not being built for woodwork. You catch the word carpentry, and it lands in the middle of the group like a thrown shoe. No one moves. They were prepared for storms, disease, scurvy, even mild mutiny. But sanding planks, measuring angles, fetching things that aren't rum, you watch their faces droop like overripe bananas, and you feel morale drain from the deck in real time. Eventually, someone fetches a hammer. You're not sure from where, since most of them were traded 2 weeks ago for a plate of something still unidentified but disturbingly delicious. This hammer has clearly been repurposed from the base of a broken telescope and possibly held together with sap. Still, it makes a sound when it hits wood. That counts as progress. Work begins. By which you mean, work sort of begins. Boards are lifted, then dropped again for strategic sitting. Nails are located, but not nearly enough. Someone offers to pry a few from the captain's bunk. The captain pretends not to hear. You assign duties. Someone is in charge of measurements, someone else of cutting. The cutter quickly discovers you've run out of actual blades and is now experimenting with a sharpened shell and a lot of swearing. Someone burns their hand on a hot nail that was left too long in the sun. They treat it with a paste of mashed papaya and confidence. Hours pass. The sun blazes. A breeze would be nice. But of course, today the weather chooses to behave. It is calm, quiet, mocking. You make another round and realize one man has hammered a plank in place using nothing but a rock and persistent optimism. It's crooked, but solid. By evening, the ship looks slightly more ship-like. Some of the bigger gaps have been patched. One section of railing now incorporates a fishing spear, and what you suspect is part of someone's wedding gift. You don't ask, you just nod. Dinner is a thin stew, flavored mostly by despair, and whatever dried herbs someone found buried beneath the rum barrels. You chew in silence, occasionally interrupted by the sound of someone sighing at full volume. No one complains. Complaining would require energy. and energy is reserved now for staring blankly at the stars. Later, you gather the journals. What's left of your crew's writing is inconsistent. One man has drawn a self-portrait labeled "Former Sailor, Now Wood Wizard." Another has penned an essay on the psychological benefits of chiseling. A third simply wrote the word "why" 47 times. You close the journals and look out at the sea. The ship rocks softly, slightly steadier than before. She's not seaworthy, but she's beginning to remember what it feels like. And maybe, just maybe, your men are too. Beneath the groaning and griping, they're learning, rebuilding, rediscovering that nails aren't just for bartering affection, but for holding things, people, planks, purpose together. The sky fades to purple. Someone starts snoring. Someone else is still hammering, gently, with a rhythm that almost sounds like hope. You decide to let them work. You tie the knot again, tighter this time. Coconut rope is strong in theory and decorative in practice. You're leaning heavily on theory. The rope holds the makeshift beam to the ship's ribs, which were once real wood and are now mostly repurposed fence posts and one very long paddle no one wants to talk about. It creaks when you let go. Not a structural creak, a nervous one. This was never in the plan. You left England with maps, ambition, and a ship built by men who had actual blueprints. Now, you're lashing palm fronds into insulation and pretending you understand how a rudder works. One of your crew swears by a type of resin he's concocted from tree sap and what might be pig fat. It smells like lies, but it's sticky. And at this point, you've stopped asking questions. Every repair comes with a memory of what it replaced. That mast section, once a lovely polished beam, now a slightly curved section of driftwood with personality. That gangway plank, technically part of a hut you were offered as a thank you gift, and somehow ended up dismantling with the help of 3 men and a mango-fueled afternoon. The crew works, slowly and without enthusiasm. They hammer, tie, saw, mostly with tools they've invented from leftover utensils and sheer will. No one speaks of naval protocol anymore. Someone wears a tool belt made from banana fiber. Someone else hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby you heard during your first week on the island. You wonder, briefly, if he's gone native or just coping. You attempt to oversee things, but the truth is you're as much a builder as you are a botanist. You try to measure angles using a compass and end up sketching a strange geometric portrait of despair. You hand it off to a sailor who nods solemnly and uses it as a paint rag. Your captain watches in silence. He's taken to sitting near the bow, polishing a spoon like it holds the secrets to seaworthiness. You suspect it's the last metal object aboard that hasn't been nailed into something or traded for affection. Progress, if it can be called that, is visible. Gaps are patched, holes are filled. The deck has a few new boards, some of which don't squeak ominously. The ship floats, technically, no longer proud and purposeful, more like a duck that's lost a bet and refuses to acknowledge it. You step back to admire the result. The lines are uneven, the joints are suspect. Some parts of the hull shimmer, not with polish, but with sap and desperation. Yet it holds together. Against odds and judgment, your floating compromise is once again a thing that could be pointed toward the horizon. Someone suggests a test float. Someone else suggests prayer. You opt for both. The tide lifts her gently. She groans in protest, but does not collapse. You watch the crew's faces shift from doubt to tentative awe. A few clap. One cries, though he says it's from sawdust. You let him have it. Night falls, and the ship bobs in the shallows like a child learning to swim. You know she won't survive another storm. You know this is temporary, precarious, fragile in every way. But for now, she floats, and so do you. The drums begin before sunset, low and steady, like the island is exhaling through its ribs. You hear laughter from the shore, the high-pitched joy of children racing each other barefoot across warm sand, and the deeper cadence of elders preparing food that smells like everything your ship never managed to make edible. Roasted breadfruit, spiced fish, and something sweet you've never identified but now dream about twice a week. You tell yourself this is just another evening. It isn't. Torches line the path from the beach to the clearing. Palm leaves woven into arcs, flower petals scattered with care, not ceremony. The entire island seems to breathe slower tonight. Even the birds have quieted down, as if they know what's coming. You and the crew walk the shore like ghosts in uniform, shirts tucked in, boots awkward against the sand. No one is carrying tools or coconuts today, just silence and the weight of leaving. The Tahitians greet you as if nothing is different, except everyone's trying a little too hard to smile. The feast is beautiful. There's music, of course, a rhythm that feels like it belongs to the earth itself. Dancers move with fluid grace, feet barely seeming to touch the ground. The women wear flower crowns like the ones your crew once found hilarious and now wear with genuine reverence. The men join in, clapping, swaying, occasionally wiping their eyes when they think no one's watching. You catch the captain tapping along with a spoon, that same one he refused to trade. It gleams in the firelight like an artifact of a different world. Gifts are brought forward, shell necklaces, hand-carved spoons. A woven mat embroidered with something that might be your name, or maybe just the word for almost friend. You're handed a basket filled with fruit, cloth, and what appears to be an intricately carved fish hook made from a piece of what was once your helm. No one says anything. You hold it to your chest like it might explain everything you can't. Then a young man walks forward and places something in your palm. It's a nail, just one, rusted slightly, bent at the tip, familiar in the way a scar is familiar. He looks at you with a strange mixture of mischief and respect. You laugh once, sharp and unplanned, then clamp your jaw as the tears threaten. You nod. He nods back. That's enough. The crew eats too fast, then too slowly. You see one sailor lingering by the fire pit with someone he's probably loved for 3 weeks and will remember for a lifetime. Another is teaching children how to make shadow puppets on a rock. The surgeon has a line of locals asking for advice about a skin rash he insists is caused by mangoes, even though you know he's just guessing. You sit on the edge of the gathering, watching the flames flicker. Someone brings you a drink. You sip it automatically, unsure if it's meant to celebrate or soften. It does both. Eventually, the music slows. The sky darkens fully. Stars pierce the blackness like distant ships. You realize this is the last warm night with familiar laughter, the last shared fire, the last evening when you won't feel the cold salt sting of responsibility against your skin. Someone stands and toasts in broken English, half Tahitian, mostly gestures. It ends with clapping, then silence, then clapping again because no one is sure if it's truly over. You stand, raise your hand, and try to speak. Nothing comes out at first, then just enough. Thank you, a simple sentence. The words land softly and ripple out across the night. You place the nail into your pocket, not as currency, not as history, as something else entirely. Then the feast ends, but no one leaves right away. Neither do you. The morning smells like damp rope and overripe bananas. You wake to the sound of hammering that should be comforting but isn't. It's the kind of hammering that says something important is being forced to fit where it doesn't belong. You roll out of your hammock and immediately feel the sway, not gentle or rhythmic, but the uncertain lurch of something remembering how to float. The ship is technically whole. It is, more or less, boat-shaped, from certain angles, at certain distances. Up close, it looks like it was reassembled by a group of men with strong opinions and no formal training, which is exactly what happened. Coconut rope holds entire sections of railing in place. Banana leaves, artfully layered, patch a hole near the quarterdeck. Someone has tied driftwood to the stern and called it extra stabilization. You suspect that person was serious. Still, the crew is chipper. They move with the nervous enthusiasm of men about to discover just how many things can go. Wrong at sea. There's cheering as the anchor is lifted, groaning as the patched sails catch wind for the first time, and actual applause when the boat creaks forward without immediately collapsing into a floating salad bar. You stand near the helm, trying to look confident, like you always believed this Frankenstein's canoe could rejoin the ocean. The Tahitians watch from shore, a silent row of faces beneath the palm trees. Some wave, others look politely skeptical. You don't blame them. This departure feels less like a voyage and more like a dare to Poseidon. A sudden gust catches the mainsail, and the ship jolts forward, not gracefully. It stumbles into motion like a drunk man remembering he owns a horse. There's a visible lean to port. The deck tilts, and barrels clatter against the railings. A loose chicken skitters past your boots, feathers ruffled and worldview shattered. Someone yells, "She's moving," as if motion alone is triumph. She is, indeed, moving and leaking. Tiny rivulets of seawater trickle through the seams, as if the ocean itself is peeking inside to see what on earth you've built. The carpenter, who recently declared himself more ideas than tools, shrugs when you point out the moisture. Ventilation, he offers. You think about arguing, then don't. Below deck, it's humid, dark, and full of things that slosh when they shouldn't. Hammocks are hung between makeshift beams, reinforced with palm trunks and ambition. Crates creak ominously. A sailor attempts to mop up one of the leaks and discovers the mop is already soggy with fruit juice. No one asks how. No one wants to know. Back above, spirits remain weirdly high. There's laughter, even. Jokes about sailing in a salad bowl, about the Royal Navy issuing medals for optimism. Someone suggests renaming the ship the Floating Maybe. Someone else carves it into the wheelhouse with a butter knife. The captain does not object. By midday, Tahiti is a fading shape behind you. The island shrinks in the distance, a blur of green hills and memories you're not quite ready to file away. You think of the feast, of the nail in your pocket, of the way someone whispered goodbye without actually saying it. You lean on the railing gently, because it's tied on with shoelaces, and let the wind tangle your thoughts. There's a noise, a splintering sound. You freeze. It's only the forward hatch settling, probably. The crew doesn't even look up. This is your new normal. A ship that coughs, wheezes, and for now, floats. The sea stretches out ahead, wide and unknowable. The boat creaks and pops like a nervous storyteller. You keep sailing, because to stop would be worse. Because floating forward is the closest thing to faith you've got. And because, despite everything, this absurd, patched-together vessel is still yours. The ink is dry, before the truth is. You sit at a narrow desk, hunched over parchment that smells like damp wool and bureaucratic compromise. The ship lists gently, groaning every so often, as if remembering it's held together by vines, rope, and bold guesses. Outside your cabin door, someone is singing a shanty about coconuts and heartache. Inside, you are inventing history, establishing favorable relations with the indigenous population. That sounds better than accidentally introduced your crew as a swarm of nail-hungry buffoons. You pause, nibble the quill, and resist the urge to write the truth, that your naval expedition temporarily became a very enthusiastic dating service. You continue. Trade was conducted in a spirit of mutual respect, which is almost true if you squint hard and ignore the part where sailors dismantled your gun deck in exchange for enthusiastic hugs and tropical fruit. The Admiralty doesn't need to know about the part where someone swapped the ship's bell for a necklace and didn't realize it until you tried to sound the alarm and ended up shaking a gourd. Minimal cultural friction. That one takes longer to write, mostly because the ink keeps smudging, and also because the words keep making your hand pause like even your fingers don't believe it. Sure, there were some minor misunderstandings, like the mango baptism, and the time the chaplain tried to convert a parrot. And yes, there was that one scuffle involving a stolen hammock, 3 coconuts, and a long conversation about whether hammocks count as diplomatic gifts. Still, no blood was spilled, no uprisings, just a gentle, chaotic slide into mutual curiosity and questionable engineering. You glance at the window. The ocean rolls past, unconcerned. The ship creaks in protest with every wave. You're fairly certain a plank just sighed. Somewhere below deck, someone sneezes and is immediately answered by a chicken. You do not ask why. The crew has settled into something like routine. They're quieter now, calmer, salt-stung, sun-leathered, and deeply aware that they nearly loved their way out of a ride home. You walk among them and catch occasional smiles, tired ones, but real. There's pride there, even if no one's quite sure what in. You return to the report. Botanical specimens collected. Preliminary cartography completed. The map is stained with juice and the occasional flower petal, but technically accurate. You leave out the detail that one of the islands is labeled "definitely not a metaphor" because your assistant got philosophical with the ink. You flip the page and consider how much detail the Lords of the Admiralty truly need. They don't need to know that you fell asleep under a tree more than once, that you laughed too easily, that you considered staying just for a second, just long enough to forget what rank smelled like. They don't need to hear about the way the air tasted sweet, or how your name sounded softer when said in a different language. They especially don't need to know about the nail, the one you kept, the one still in your pocket, cool and smooth from handling. It isn't worth anything, really, not anymore, but it carries the weight of too many evenings, of dances you barely remember, and faces you won't forget. You write one last line. Recommend future exploration. Strong potential for ongoing alliance. You seal it. You do not write about the farewells, about the hugs that lingered too long, the eyes that didn't look away, the silence that wrapped around your departure like a net of things unsaid. You tell yourself it's not dishonesty, it's diplomacy. Then you fold the report, tuck it among the other papers, and lean back in your chair. The ship sways beneath you like it knows it's carrying more than cargo. The truth drifts behind you, warm and fragrant and fading with the tide. The tales start as whispers over stale biscuits and stretch into full-blown sagas by the time the rum is passed around. You hear them first while walking the deck, pretending to check the rigging when really you're listening for signs of cabin fever. Instead, you catch two midshipmen arguing about who first tamed a wild boar with nothing but a spoon and charm. You know for a fact it was a half-starved piglet that tripped over its own feet and promptly fell asleep. But that detail doesn't make it into the story. Below deck, the stories multiply. They're retold with the confidence of men who've forgotten how many parts of the ship they traded for brief affection. The carpenter claims he personally rebuilt the stern with driftwood and sheer will. The cook insists he won a dance competition judged by Tahitian royalty. You do not remind him he tripped into a fire pit and was applauded only because he didn't catch on fire. Memory begins to melt around the edges, taking facts with it and replacing them with something warmer, more dramatic, and much more flattering. You sit through these tales, sometimes with a raised eyebrow, sometimes with a half smile. No one remembers how they panicked when the storm came, or how long it took to fix a leak with mashed breadfruit and prayer. But everyone remembers the sunsets, the laughter, the way the air felt like silk and smelled like oranges. Some part of you suspects they're rewriting it, not just for entertainment, but for comfort, a way to stitch a messy, beautiful blur into something that can be carried home without too many questions. You overhear someone telling the tale of the Great Nail Exchange, now elevated into the stuff of legend. According to this new version, the nails were enchanted, the women were princesses, and the entire endeavor was actually a covert diplomatic mission. A blacksmith is mentioned. There was no blacksmith. But there was a man who once filed a hinge into something vaguely nail-shaped and considered it his life's work. He's a folk hero now. No one mentions the meetings you tried to hold, the reminders about naval protocol, the brief but heartfelt plea to stop hollowing out the hull for romance. You're pretty sure the memory of you has been replaced by a generic authority figure who occasionally growled in the background and always looked damp. You could correct them. You could pull out your journal, point to the pages with actual dates, numbers, and drawings. But you don't, because the stories aren't just lies. They're wishful architecture, memory softened by distance, made safe enough to hold. One sailor sings a song he insists was composed on the island. It's suspiciously similar to a sea shanty he's sung for years, but now it includes a verse about a forbidden love and a mango grove. No one questions it. They just join in, off-key and proud. You pass by a group trying to outdo each other with tales of island battles that never happened. They argue over who wrestled a shark. The shark becomes a metaphor. Then it becomes a god. Then it's two sharks, and one of them speaks Latin. The men nod solemnly, as if they were all there and just forgot. The night deepens. Stars blink overhead like indifferent witnesses. Someone lights a lantern, and shadows stretch along the deck. The tales grow quieter, slower, less swagger, more pause. You hear one sailor murmur about the woman who gave him a carved necklace. He still wears it, hidden beneath his uniform. Another mumbles something about a child with his eyes, but then laughs and changes the subject. Eventually, the stories drift into silence. One by one, the crew nods off, cradled by the rhythm of the sea and the weight of memories now officially taller than they are. You remain for a while, watching the waves, feeling the ship shift gently beneath you. You close your eyes and let their stories roll past you, half truth, half dream. You don't correct them. You let them remember it the way they need to. Because some histories aren't written. They're whispered in the dark and kept alive by laughter and exaggeration. And tonight, that feels like enough. The mist hangs over the harbor like a half-forgotten memory as your ship limps into port. She creaks and sighs, the patched-together hull groaning like an old man with too many secrets and too few teeth. You stand at the bow, boots damp, hair stiffer than rope, and you wonder if the entire country smells this musty or if your nose has simply forgotten the scent of dry land. Seagulls wheel above as if deciding whether you're still technically alive or just another thing to pick at. England greets you with gray skies and grayer faces. A line of stiff-backed officials waits at the dock, clipboards in hand, expressions preloaded with expectation. You can already feel the questions forming in their heads: latitude and longitude, ocean currents, local flora, cultural impact. Did you chart the reef? Did you observe the transit of Venus? Why is your ship half coconut? They want data. And technically, you have data. Crumpled maps inked with salty fingerprints. Journals full of sketches, some scientific, others drawn under the influence of rum and soft lighting. Your assistant brings a crate of plant samples, all labeled in a hand that looks increasingly tipsy as the pages progress. One specimen is labeled Leafy Mystery, possibly sentient. You choose not to explain that one. The Admiralty men swarm you before you can step fully onto the pier. One demands an account of the tides near Matavai Bay. Another inquires about barometric pressure on the third week of April. A third, clearly excited, wants to know if the native metallurgy aligns with his obscure thesis on early Polynesian copperwork. You nod, smile, and hand over the binder labeled Observations. It's heavy, thorough, and painstakingly devoid of anything scandalous. You edited it during the long nights at sea, whittling down the chaos into something palatable, scientific, and utterly misleading. No mention of the ceremonial loincloth you wore for 2 weeks straight. No hint of the cannon you disassembled for a single evening of enthusiastic company. The phrase minor structural repurposing is as close as you get to explaining why your rudder looks like it was carved by a toddler with a spoon. You keep your tone serious, academic. You use words like intercultural synergy and unsanctioned adaptation. You describe the ship's reassembly using phrases like collaborative engineering with indigenous partners. You do not mention that your engineers were a farmer, a fisherman, and a man named Tupou, who thought hammers were romantic. The bureaucrats nod approvingly. One even claps you on the back, murmuring something about commendation potential. You smile, internally flinching as you recall the farewell feast where someone tried to return a nail out of guilt and you nearly sobbed. They ask about the crew, and you answer in the vaguest terms possible. Morale fluctuated, which is technically true. It fluctuated wildly, usually in response to the presence of bananas or the absence of trousers. They ask if you faced hostility. You pause. You think of the storm, the near sinking, the time someone tried to plug a hole with dried fish. You settle on. Navigational challenges were overcome with team resilience. The man with the copper thesis seems disappointed you didn't spark a war. You think about mentioning the missionary, now likely halfway through starting a wellness cult on a beach. Instead, you just hand him a seashell and say it was culturally significant. He writes that down. By the end of the interview, you're exhausted. Not from the voyage, not from the hunger or heat or the slow dissolution of British naval order under palm trees, but from the sheer effort of smoothing it all down into a story that fits within the borders of polite empire. You watch your men wander down the gangplank behind you. Their uniforms are still technically intact, but the posture is different, looser, as if they left something important behind and aren't quite ready to admit it. A younger officer approaches with a notebook, eager to hear about the incident with the local chief. You shake your head and offer him a redacted version involving a fruit exchange and a weather misunderstanding. As the sun creeps over the roofs of London, you catch your reflection in a puddle, salt-stiffened coat, tan lines in absurd places, a flower pressed between pages in your journal. You're back in England, but not entirely. And definitely not the same. They read your report in a room where the wallpaper costs more than your ship's anchor. It's a long, mahogany chamber filled with bearded men who believe the world is theirs. So long as it's measured in longitude and described in handwriting, they can pretend to understand. You sit to one side, still damp from the return journey, still blinking at how quiet land can be when no one's shouting about coconuts or accidentally setting fire to the sail again. A clerk clears his throat and begins reading. His voice is the sort that could make a volcanic eruption sound bureaucratic. He goes through it line by line, pausing at cordial interactions with local leadership as if it were a sermon. No mention of the part where someone traded a sextant for a kiss and a ceremonial drum. They nod, slowly. A few tilt their heads at your mention of resourceful island-based structural adjustments, which is how you've decided to frame the entire missing aft quarter of the ship. Someone scribbles a note, possibly promising, possibly concerning. It's hard to tell with these people. You've just described a voyage that descended into moral limbo, tropical romance, ship cannibalism, and spontaneous tattoo acquisition, and they look mildly pleased. There are no questions about discipline, no outrage over structural integrity failures. One man, wearing enough lace to upholster a sofa, raises a brow and inquires about ongoing trade viability. You reply that yes, relationships were formed. He nods as if you just handed him a map to buried treasure. You start to realize something. They don't care, or rather, they care about exactly one thing: possibility. The parts where discipline dissolved, where diplomacy turned into a blur of body paint and mangoes, those aren't bugs in the mission. They're features, signs of effective contact, signs that you can send more men, more ships, more charts, and they'll come back with stories, fruit, and maybe fewer cannons, but more reasons to keep going. No one mentions the nails, the cannon bolts, the rudder improvisation, the piece of mast you're fairly sure is still being used as a hammock frame by someone named Rahi. None of it matters. They read your summary of adaptive repairs, utilizing regional materials, and smile. In this room, British improvisation is just empire in creative mode. A discussion breaks out about the next expedition. Different ship, same flag. New names on the roster, men with fewer teeth. and more ambition. One of them is already talking about bringing livestock this time. You stare at him and imagine a goat trying to survive what you just endured. You wish it luck. You try to gauge if anyone understands what's actually in your report. Not the words, but the gaps between them. The way it hints at how quickly authority unravels when faced with warmth, fruit, and the persuasive power of someone smiling at you across a beach fire. But no, they're too busy planning. Routes, cargo, supplies. Someone even suggests sending a painter next time to better capture the landscape. You stifle a laugh. He's not going to paint landscapes. He's going to come back with sketches of thighs and unconvincing denials. You stand, eventually. The room is already moving past you. A new voyage is forming in the air like a storm on the horizon. You hear your own name spoken with vague praise. A man calls you effective. Another says you've demonstrated cultural tact. You think back to the moment you baptized a fruit and smile. As you leave, the doors close behind you, with the soft click of empire folding itself neatly into another folder. No one asks for the truth. No one asks about the missionary with the sarong, or the sailor who tried to trade his boots for a second chance at love. No one asks why. For 2 full weeks, your ship's official log was replaced with pressed flowers and very suggestive sketches of breadfruit. And so history rolls forward, neatly penned and thoroughly fictionalized. The Admiralty prepares more ships. More nails are packed. More officers rehearse their introductions in the mirror, unaware they'll soon be seduced out of their uniforms and into something that smells like hibiscus and poor decisions. You walk into the London fog, salt still clinging to your coat, and feel the strange warmth of knowing the story, they believe, is not the story that happened. It rarely is, but it's the one that sails.